什么是赘字呢？平常不写文章的我们也要小心吗？今天我们就收集了一些平常口语以及写 email 可能会用到的赘字，让我们自我检视一下。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. We're glad that you could join us for another podcast episode where we're going to talk about redundancy. Redundancy is when you repeat yourself over and over again. So welcome back to this episode.
That's right. 说起 redundant words, 我们常在写作的人或者上过写作课的人都知道，老师都会说千万不要用 redundant words. 那如果你比如说有用像 Grammarly 像这样子的 software 的话，你可能平常就算在写 a very, 它可能就会提示你说少用这个东西。所以到底redundant words 是什么叫做 redundant words？ 那什么时候我们可以用它，什么时候不可以用它呢？
In this episode, we want to cover a bit about where redundancies can be useful, but where they should mostly be avoided. When it comes to the world of writing in email, as Sherry said, a lot of these software helpers like Grammarly have a tendency to drop any kind of redundancy word. So what are some examples of redundancies that people use pretty often? Something like, in my past experience. In this instance, your experience, of course, is in the past. Yeah. It's actually not required because you don't have future experience that you are going to discuss. So in that case, it's just, in my experience, or in the past. It is only necessary to choose one. You don't require both words.
Exactly. 那另外一个 phrase 你可能常会听到 the basic necessities. If you look at the words basic and necessities, they are actually very similar. 所以你可以讲 these are my basics or these are my necessities. You don't actually need to put these words together.
Yes, unless you're singing a Jungle Book song about the bare necessities.
Oh, right.
Then it's not always necessary to use both phrases. Other things you'll see people write a lot is advanced planning. Advanced planning is literally planning a plan in advance. In that case, is just planning.
Exactly. So that's redundant. And also, I find myself saying this sometimes, actual fact, right? Actual are fact, and fact are fact. So putting them together, again, these are very redundant.
These are all examples of placing an adjective in front of a noun where the adjective is meant to modify something that the noun already represents. So in the case of actual facts, if you are going to use actual, you're trying to say something that this is real, this is factual.
Right.
But then putting it in front of a noun like facts, which is inherently by itself supposed to be true or factual, it becomes redundant, not always necessary. So a lot of times if you just want to clean up your writing, looking for these redundancies where you're continually putting an adjective, could be an adjective as simply as very in front of a noun where you don't need to support it quite as much. The noun speaks for itself.
Right. And I think very is something that we use all the time. Very good. Very beautiful. Do we really need that very to modify beautiful or good? Does it actually make your sentence sounds different? 这个时候我们就可以检视一下，这个句子是否可以再简化一点。
The most often use of very is actually in our second pairing, where you see a lot of redundancy, like an adverb plus an adjective. For example, it is very unique.
We say that all the time though, right?
It's something that comes out a lot, but then the reality is unique means that it,
独特.
yeah, it is a singular version of it, or it's not that common. So of course it should be unique. It's not require like very unique, unless you're talking about something incredibly specific. But you get this a lot with YouTubers and influencers, like, this is a very unique bag. You're like, it's probably not. It's probably not.
Oh my God. Okay. We should do an episode just on describing what influencers love to say. Okay. So I digress. We'll come back. 所以类似像这样子的 adverb 加上 adjectives 的这样子片语还有什么呢？ For example, extremely significant. 那其实啊 extremely significant 如果我们把它用在平常 presentation 上面好了，口语上面 can we use them? 那如果把它放在我们平常口语上面啊，或者是做简报的时候，你当然是可以用。But here's the key. Everything in moderation, right? 所有的事情都是用的刚刚好就好了。我觉得这边比较重要的部分是我们常常会用这种 extremely 或者是 absolutely 去强调后面的 adjectives, 后面的形容词 which is absolutely fine. But when you overuse them, and that just becomes not so genuine.
It just feels like if everything is absolutely amazing, then what is actually absolutely amazing?
Exactly.
Right?
I think it goes back to like 很多 influencer, 他们都会讲说 I am extremely obsessed with this bag. 然后他每个礼拜都会讲一样的话，而且都是用在不同的包包上面 or this is like the best thing ever. 当你讲同样的话，但是你常常用的话then what is best? Like, what's your standard? That's confusing to me.
Right. It actually downplays when something is amazing because you're not sure, is this person just really excited in the moment, or do they genuinely think in the long run this is one of the best values or the best things you can buy? So this is something back to, let's say, professional email. When you're trying to, say, upsell a client, if every single sentence or every time that a new product comes out, then they're like, this is the absolute best product that we have ever created. That may be true, but if you hear that too often, you'll just be like, oh, okay, I'll just try it out for myself.
Right.
Like, I don't feel anything exciting about using a lot of these adverbs or adjectives that are redundant because they're repeated too often.
Absolutely. And here are other examples where you get this. I think a lot of native speakers also say the same thing. Repeat again. Repeat again. Repeat 已经就是重复的意思 Again 也是重复的意思 So you often hear people kind of put these together.
Right. Whereas it's just much more straightforward to say, could you please say that again?
Yeah.
Or could you please repeat that? Another one that you hear very often, although I don't see a lot of native speakers do this, but I hear it in Taiwan quite a bit, is, can we collaborate together? Inherently, collaborate and together are the same thing. Or more specifically, collaborate insinuates that you're going to be working together. So it's not necessary to say it again.
And there's another one that I think we often use it, is that, can we double check again? That happens a lot, right? You're double checking something, meaning that you're doing this again. It already had that definition of let me do this again. But if you put again, it's like you're doing this again and again. That's something I think a lot of Taiwanese they would make that mistakes once in a while.
Now, this doesn't mean you won't hear this phrase. It just means that if used properly, this is more like someone is extremely detail-oriented. So if they're trying to talk to someone that they don't quite trust to do the job properly, be like, did you double check it? Yeah. Why don't you double check it again? This is more along the lines of if you say that or if you hear that, there's probably some kind of distrust in the quality of the checking. Anyone who has kids, if you're the kid's like, I don't know where my jacket is. I can't find my jacket. You'll be like, do you check your room? Yes. Can you check your room again, please?
Or do you need to go to the bathroom before we leave? I already did. And be like, can you go again, please? It's a long ride.
It's like, are you sure? Are you sure? So if someone uses like, can you double check again? That should be the sentiment, not just, I want to repeat myself, but more like, are you sure? So be careful when you say this or when you hear this. It has a very specific feeling associated with it.
And also, we may hear this a lot when people tell a story or describe some situation. He or she may say, first and foremost.
This is actually one of the phrases that I don't mind when used in the proper context. For example, if you actually have a very detailed or a very complicated plan and you really want to bring it down to what do people need to know or what's the first step, then this is a great way to do emphasis. But back to what we said earlier, if this is a phrase that is at every single thing where you're giving out a list, then it loses its meaning. Because if someone's just like, okay, first and foremost, we need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then someone's like, okay, so is that first one a priority? And they're like, oh, well, maybe. No. When you use this phrase, it's really redundant from the standpoint of, I need you to prioritize this thing. Like first and foremost, literally what we're meaning by foremost is that for is actually meaning the front, like forefront. It's in the very beginning. So first and foremost is like, do this first. So if you use this phrase properly, it's a beautiful phrase. But some people just be like, okay, first and foremost, and secondly, and then last. They're just using it as a counting mechanism. That's not ideal.
So basically using this phrase to kind of lay the groundwork, right? So the second one, in my opinion, I think. Now, they're pretty similar, to be really honest. Like, in my opinion, just say what you're thinking. Don't just go, in my opinion, I think, blah, 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 because that's really redundant.
This is very difficult to do in speaking. In fact, in making this podcast, Sherry and I use the phrase, I think, all the time. I have to cut it constantly. So we're not immune.
We're not.
We have this issue. But in your writing, it is much easier to spot because as you're going back and looking through your email, spot checking, trying to refine it, this is something that you can be aware of and actively try and improve. Whereas speaking, it's something that takes over time, but it always helps to go back. And if you're overusing phrases like, in my opinion, or I think, just simply because overusing it starts to come across either a little bit like ditzy or sometimes like, in my opinion, or it just feels less thoughtful because you're not stating a fact or you're not stating something that you want to get done. You're like, well, I think, right? That hesitation that we've talked about before.
It does sound hesitation. Actually, we just came from a training yesterday, and it was like an interview, a mock interview process where a number of them, because they're a little nervous, which is absolutely normal, but because they're nervous, they tend to say, I think, and it sounds a little bit, they're hesitating while they're saying, I think. 所以其实不管是在写作或者是口语上面，还是要小心一下这一些很基本的用词，不是说他们文法上面有什么错误，只是说它会不会带给你，带给听者或者是读者什么样子的感觉。Now the last one is plus. In addition, and sometimes you hear this in verbal speaking communication a lot, when someone just wanted to add that one more point, 但是 plus 跟 in addition 是一样的东西.
Right. Or you'll hear something like, in addition, I also think. Yeah. Be like, you already additioned, you don't need the also.
Yeah.
Choose one. Like, in addition, I believe. Or in addition, the next thing to tackle. You don't need the also. But you hear this a lot where people really want to emphasize like, plus, in addition, I also want to emphasize.
Yeah, exactly. Or like moreover, they will add that in there as well. 所以其实就是在写作上面啦，我觉得 赘字这个部分呢，真的要比较小心。我们在 Premium 的1月，我们已经准备了一个课程，就是 How to Write for Clarity。那其实这一些我们今天所讲到的这一些呢，都是能够让提升我们的清楚写作的这种清楚的程度，减少这些赘字，加强你真正想要陈述的 content， 你的内容，其实那才是最重要的。
Well, we very certainly hope that you enjoyed the content of this episode because this content was specifically prepared to make you feel that redundancy is not such a redundant thing. Thank you for joining us at the Executive Plus Department of Redundancy Department podcast.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye. The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.